If you love fantasy games, the right book is not always the one with the biggest map or the longest glossary. The better question is whether the book gives you the same kind of reading loop that games create: a clear build, a changing world, a sense of danger, and steady discovery. This guide is for readers who like quest feel, classes, gear, skill growth, companions, strange regions, and that satisfying sense of moving deeper into a world. The books here are not ranked by literary prestige. They are sorted by what a fantasy gamer is likely to feel while reading them. Some feel like monster contracts. Some feel like a party campaign. Some feel like a difficult open world with lore in every corner. Some feel like character progression where every new rule matters. The safest way to use this list is simple. Pick the game feeling you already enjoy, then start with the book that matches it. If you want contracts in a rough world, start with The Last Wish. If you want a party adventure, start with Kings of the Wyld. If you want systems and builds, start with Mistborn. If you want a huge world that rewards patience, keep The Way of Kings for later. I am using 4 practical lanes for this guide. First is Contract Fantasy, where the appeal is moving from problem to problem in a dangerous world. That lane points toward The Last Wish. Second is Lone Wanderer Fantasy, where the book feels spare, strange, and focused on atmosphere more than comfort. That lane points toward The Gunslinger. Third is Party Fantasy, where banter, teamwork, skill rolls, and group momentum matter. That lane points toward Kings of the Wyld, The Blacktongue Thief, and The Crystal Shard. Fourth is Build and Lore Fantasy, where the pleasure comes from rules, training, systems, history, and long-term escalation. That lane points toward Mistborn, The Name of the Wind, and The Way of Kings. This is not a complete fantasy canon. It is a start map for gamers. The goal is to reduce friction, not to prove that every famous book belongs here. If a book is missing, that does not mean it is weak. It only means this list is optimized for the specific reader who wants fantasy books with a game-like sense of progression, danger, choice, and discovery. The lanes also keep the recommendations honest. A book can be excellent and still be the wrong first step for a player who wants motion, tools, and readable stakes. The Last Wish, Andrzej Sapkowski. A dark, witty fantasy collection follows a professional monster hunter through compact episodes, moral pressure, and a rough world built through sharp encounters. This is the easiest Witcher starting point for fantasy gamers because it feels closest to a chain of well-designed side quests. Each story has a focused problem, a specific location, and a clear emotional test. That structure helps new readers because you do not need to memorize a massive world before the book starts working. You learn the setting through contracts, conversations, customs, and uneasy choices. The tone is dry, folkloric, and often morally gray, but it is not difficult to follow. For game fans, the strongest appeal is the rhythm. A situation appears. A monster or curse seems obvious. The real question becomes more complicated. That loop feels familiar to anyone who enjoys quests where the objective marker is not the full truth. Start here if you want dark fairy tale logic, practical danger, and a world that feels lived in without requiring a huge commitment. It is also the right start if you came from the games and want the books to feel recognizable without needing a full lore lecture first. The Gunslinger, Stephen King. A lean, dark fantasy western follows a solitary figure through a harsh, dreamlike landscape with mythic atmosphere and a strange sense of pursuit. This is the most unusual pick on the list, and that is exactly why it belongs here. The Gunslinger does not feel like a party role-playing game. It feels like the opening zone of a bleak mythic world where the rules are not fully explained yet. For gamers who enjoy sparse lore, strange landmarks, and lonely travel, that can be compelling. The book is short, direct, and atmospheric. It asks the reader to accept mystery rather than demand a full guidebook at the start. That makes it a good fit for people who enjoy worlds like dark westerns, ruined realms, and surreal fantasy settings. It is not the warmest entry point, and it is not the best choice if you want friendly companions or clear systems right away. Its strength is mood. It creates a sense that the world is larger than the page, and that every reference points toward a deeper mythology. Start here if you like difficult roads, spare prose, and fantasy that feels more like a haunted landscape than a comfort adventure. Kings of the Wyld, Nicholas Eames. A funny, warm, action-forward fantasy adventure follows an aging mercenary band in a world that treats adventuring groups like famous touring acts. This is one of the easiest recommendations for fantasy gamers because it understands party dynamics immediately. The pleasure is not just the quest, it is the group. Each member has a role, a history, a style, and a reason the team feels different when everyone is together. That makes the book especially friendly for readers who enjoy tabletop campaigns, class-based teams, and the rhythm of a group getting back into motion. The tone is lighter than many epic fantasies, but it still has stakes, danger, and emotional weight. It is also faster than it looks because the premise is clean. You understand the mission quickly, then the fun comes from character chemistry, set pieces, and the way the world treats adventurers as legends with very human problems. Start here if you want something approachable, energetic, and easy to visualize. It works well for gamers who like a campaign feel without needing dense lore first. It is also a strong choice when you want fantasy that feels fun without becoming shallow. The Blacktongue Thief, Christopher Buehlman. A sharp, gritty fantasy road adventure follows a thief through a dangerous world with dark humor, rough magic, and constant pressure. This pick is for gamers who like risky travel, unreliable roads, strange factions, and a narrator who sounds like he has survived by being clever rather than noble. The book has a campaign feel, but it is not cozy. It is funny in a hard-edged way, and its world feels expensive, damaged, and full of consequences. That makes it a good fit for players who enjoy rogue classes, risky bargains, and fantasy settings where every inn, road, and border might hide trouble. The language has more bite than a simple starter fantasy, so I would not make it the very first book for every beginner. But if you already like grimy fantasy games, it can feel immediately alive. The appeal is momentum. You keep moving from one pressure point to the next, learning the world through hazards rather than history lectures. Start here if you want a road quest with teeth, a strong voice in a fantasy world that feels dangerous before it feels majestic. Mistborn: The Final Empire, Brandon Sanderson. A clear cinematic fantasy novel introduces a rule-based magic system, a resistance framework, and a dark empire built for fast comprehension. This is the easiest systems pick on the list. If you love skill trees, buildcraft, resource limits, and abilities with rules, Mistborn is often the cleanest fantasy gateway. The magic is not vague. It has constraints, costs, and combinations, which makes it satisfying for readers who like understanding how power works. The book also has a strong mission structure, so it does not feel like wandering through lore for hundreds of pages. You get a clear direction, then the pleasure comes from planning, training, social pressure, and the gradual reveal of what the world allows. For fantasy gamers, this can feel close to learning a combat system and then watching advanced players use it creatively. It is a series starter, so there is more beyond the first book, but the entry is direct enough to work as a test. Start here if you want fantasy with readable prose, visible mechanics, and a strong sense of escalation. It is one of the best choices for gamers who need rules before they trust magic. The Name of the Wind, Patrick Rothfuss. A lyrical fantasy novel follows a gifted narrator through music, learning, reputation, and a world that feels shaped by stories and hidden rules. For gamers, this book often works because it has a strong progression fantasy feeling without reading like a stat sheet. The appeal is growth. You watch a person gather skills, language, social awareness, music, and fragments of knowledge. That can feel close to leveling a character through study, performance, survival, and reputation. The prose is more polished and musical than many fast fantasy starters, so the pace is not only about action, it is about immersion. The world has universities, songs, names, rumors, trades, and mysteries that make it feel like a place with systems under the surface. This is a good choice for players who enjoy bard characters, lore hunting, academy settings, and skill mastery. The honest caveat is that the larger series is not complete, so readers who need a finished path may want to wait or treat this as a single strong reading experience. Start here if you want beauty, craft, and a character growth loop more than constant combat. The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson. A large epic fantasy novel opens a storm-swept world of war, ancient history, moral pressure, and magic systems that expand over time. This is the ambitious pick. I would not hand it to every first-time fantasy reader, but for a fantasy gamer who enjoys deep worlds, long campaigns, faction history, and slow investment, it can be exactly right. The book is large because it is building a major setting with cultures, military structures, strange ecology, old mysteries, and multiple viewpoints. That can feel like starting a huge role-playing game where the tutorial is part of the world itself. The early experience requires patience, but the reward is scale. You begin to feel that the setting has rules, history, geography, and spiritual weight. For gamers who love long arcs, character builds, and the feeling of slowly understanding a massive system, that can be powerful. The important warning is commitment. Do not start here if you only want a light weekend read. Start here if you want a long campaign, a world that keeps opening, and a fantasy series where patience is part of the design. The Crystal Shard, R.A. Salvatore. A classic adventure fantasy novel enters the Forgotten Realms with party action, iconic archetypes, and a direct tabletop-inspired sense of danger. This is the most visibly role-playing game pick on the list because it comes from a world many fantasy gamers already recognize through tabletop culture. The appeal is clarity. You get cold regions, dangerous artifacts, martial skill, recognizable fantasy roles, and the kind of adventure structure that feels close to a classic campaign. It is not trying to be the most modern or literary book here. Its strength is accessibility and archetypal energy. For readers who want a bridge from Dungeons & Dragons style fantasy into prose, that directness can be useful. The book also helps explain why certain fantasy images remain so durable. The ranger, the warrior, the magical threat, the contested region, and the party moving through danger. Start here if you want familiar fantasy furniture and a quick path into a larger shared world. It is especially good for readers who prefer clear adventure over experimental structure. Think of it as a comfortable gateway, not a final destination. Here is the cleanest decision path. If you want the safest first pick for most fantasy gamers, choose Kings of the Wyld. It has party energy, humor, clear movement, and a low barrier to entry. If you want monster contracts and morally gray folklore, choose The Last Wish. If you want rules, builds, and visible mechanics, choose Mistborn: The Final Empire. If you want rogue danger and a harsh road quest, choose The Blacktongue Thief. If you want a classic Dungeons & Dragons bridge, choose The Crystal Shard. If you want a strange lone wanderer atmosphere, choose The Gunslinger. If you want skill growth, music, and reputation, choose The Name of the Wind. If you want a huge campaign world and do not mind a slow build, choose The Way of Kings. This is the main point. Do not start with the book that sounds most important. Start with the book that matches the kind of play you already enjoy. Fantasy reading becomes much easier when the first step feels familiar. After that, you can move outward into bigger, older, stranger, or heavier books with more confidence. This approach also protects you from burnout. You can read one lane now, save the heavier lane for later, and still feel like the list is working. The best fantasy book for a gamer is the one that turns reading into a familiar kind of discovery. That might be a contract, a party quest, a class build, a huge open world, or a dangerous road. The Last Wish gives you compact missions and folklore. The Gunslinger gives you harsh mythic atmosphere. Kings of the Wyld gives you group chemistry and campaign energy. The Blacktongue Thief gives you rogue survival and road danger. Mistborn gives you rules, powers, and escalation. The Name of the Wind gives you skill progression and storycraft. The Way of Kings gives you a massive long-form world. The Crystal Shard gives you classic adventure fantasy with tabletop roots. If you are unsure, start with Kings of the Wyld for the easiest party feel, or Mistborn if you want the clearest system. Then use the next book to change lanes. That is how this list works best. It is not a test of taste. It is a map from the games you already enjoy to books that can keep that sense of discovery alive. For long-term reading, keep the same rule. Match the next book to the kind of experience you want this week, not to the loudest recommendation online. That makes the habit easier to repeat.